Most gardeners keep adding compost to clay soil year after year and then, well, act surprised when nothing really changes at all. The beds still puddle, roots still stall, and a year later the soil is just as dense as it was before. The mistake isn't a lack of effort or dedication. The mistake is believing compost alone fixes structure in clay. It doesn't. What actually happens is the compost sinks, disappears, and leaves the underlying problem untouched. I learned that lesson the hard way after years of amending, tilling, and working the soil, and honestly, constantly wondering why my vegetable yields never seemed to match the amount of effort and inputs I put in. If you've been gardening in clay for more than a season, you've probably seen this exact thing yourself.
You spread compost, maybe 2 or 3 inches, work it in, and for a few weeks, the soil feels better. Then the rain comes, the surface seals, and the bed goes right back to being sticky when wet and rock hard when dry. That cycle is why so many gardeners burn out. They're doing work that looks productive but doesn't really compound.
Before we go further, subscribe to the channel if you care about fixes that last for years, not just weekends. Farm logic is about systems that stay fixed, not constant patchwork. The reason compost sinks into clay without fixing anything comes down to both physics and biology, not just effort or quality. Clay particles are extremely tiny and carry electrical charges, making them unique. When you add finished compost, which is already mostly broken down, microbes consume what little energy is left in it very quickly. Within months, that material collapses into the clay matrix. It feeds plants briefly, but doesn't change how soil is built. I confirmed this by digging soil profiles season after season. In beds where I added compost each year, the top inch looked darker, but below that was the same dense layer every year. Roots stayed shallow, water perched, earthworms never moved deeper. The compost didn't integrate because there was nothing holding space open. So this is where common advice really goes wrong. People often say, just keep adding organic matter to your soil. But honestly, that's not the whole story at all. They don't tell you that the type and decay rate of organic matter actually matter much more than just the amount. Fast decaying inputs disappear before they can form stable humus. Clay soils especially need humus, not just food scraps. What really works is adding carbon that breaks down slowly, becoming part of the soil structure. My turning point came when I stopped expecting compost to do everything and started using it as an inoculant, not a fix. In my small backyard garden with heavy clay, I stopped tilling. Instead of mixing compost in, I spread a half-inch layer of finished compost right on top, then added 2 to 3 inches of coarse, partially decomposed carbon. That carbon came from shredded cardboard, leaf mold that wasn't fully broken down, and aged wood chips, dark, still fibrous. The ratio mattered. About 4 parts slow carbon to 1 part finished compost by volume. Watering that system deeply was absolutely critical. I wanted the moisture to move through the profile, not just sit on top. Within just a few weeks, we could see fungal threads appearing under the mulch. By the end of the season, the clay soil beneath began breaking into aggregates rather than simply smearing. Raised beds needed a slightly different approach, especially when dealing with heavy clay soils. That's because, well, clay behaves even worse when it's confined in a small space. In raised beds that had slumped and compacted, I lightly integrated coarse carbon material into only the top 4 to 6 inches, making sure to keep it under 20% by volume. Any more than that and the bed dried out unevenly and unpredictably. After that first careful integration, everything else stayed on the surface as a mulch layer. No more mixing, no more digging, just let the surface layer do the work. By the second year, Those raised beds held water for much longer periods of time, and yet, at the same time, they also drained water much faster than before, which might sound contradictory until you actually see it happen in person. That's the soil structure doing its job perfectly. Compost alone never achieved that kind of result. Here's another piece of bad advice. Adding sand to clay won't help unless humus is already present in soil. I ran side-by-side tests with sand-amended clay and humus-amended clay. The sand beds compacted into something closer to masonry, honestly. The humus beds, by contrast, stayed workable. Sand without humus makes concrete, period. Even in hydroponic systems, this principle clearly shows up and makes a difference. I know that sounds strange, but when I started using low concentrations of humic substances derived from leonardite, root architecture changed noticeably and for the better. At 1 to 2 milliliters per gallon, roots branched more, nutrient uptake stabilized, and plants handled stress even better. That's not nutrition, that's actually structure at the microscopic level. The trade-off here is speed versus durability. Compost gives fast feedback, while humus building gives slow, permanent, lasting gains. If you're growing annual vegetables and want long-term consistency, you have to think beyond just the current season. Another mistake I see constantly is overwatering clay soil that's been amended with compost. Because compost increases the surface porosity, at least temporarily, gardeners often water more, thinking infiltration has actually improved. But in reality, water just hits the dense layer underneath and, well, it simply stalls there. Roots suffocate, diseases creep in, growth plateaus, plants suffer. With humus, watering changes. You water less often, but deeper, and the soil absorbs water instead of resisting. After 3 full seasons of correcting this problem, my garden beds finally stopped crusting over after every rain. They didn't crack open during dry spells anymore either. I could work them even after heavy watering without destroying the structure at all. That's when I truly knew the fix was real. If you're managing clay soil and still relying on compost as your primary amendment, you're asking it to do structural work it simply isn't designed for. Compost feeds the soil, humus builds structure. Clay only changes when its structure changes, not just from adding compost. This doesn't mean compost is useless. Its role is supportive, not foundational. Reframing compost as a biological starter, not a structural fix, helped everything else fall into place. If this perspective saves you frustration, go ahead and subscribe to the channel. We really focus on what actually holds up in soil, beds, and systems that get used hard. Clay soil isn't broken, it's just incomplete, just needs improvement. When you stop burying compost and instead focus on building stable carbon on and above the soil's surface, clay finally gets the crucial spacing it needs to function properly. Share this video with a gardener who keeps adding compost, hoping for better results, but still getting the same disappointing outcome every season. Remember, better food always comes from better soil logic, and that's the knowledge we're building together here at Farm Logic, one permanent fix at a time. So don't forget to share and subscribe.